as we've talked about, it can be difficult to distinguish between characteristics that are biologically influenced and ones that are culturally influenced. So a lot of times you'll see studies being done in infancy or early childhood to identify biological traits versus cultural ones, because at that point they have had less cultural training or less enculturation than as compared to an older child. So you do see some differences there, biological, which would appear to be biological, because you'll see things like boys are less likely to cry when meeting someone new, for example, and they develop motor skills a bit earlier than biologically female babies. Okay, but as we age, culture starts to play a stronger role, and it becomes more difficult, if not impossible, to isolate the biological differences from the cultural ones. Okay, so if you look at a brand new baby that hasn't had a lot of enculturation, or doesn't have a memory yet to be able to interpret behaviors that are being bestowed upon it, you can start to see biological differences more clearly. But as you start to age, culture begins to play a lot stronger role, and it continues to play a stronger and stronger role as you get older. So it becomes more difficult to find the boundary between biological characteristics or behaviors and cultural characteristics or behaviors. And so what this means is that we're moving toward a biocultural view of both sex and gender. And this just means an integration or combination of biological characteristics and cultural characteristics forming the humans and behaviors and ideals we see in ourselves and others today. So instead of coming from a perspective of humans being wholly biological or wholly cultural, we're blending those two ideas to get a more holistic picture. Okay, and so how we talk about gender and sex is through what's called gender and sex system. These are the ideas and social patterns that a society uses to organize males, females, and any other gender or sex category that might exist. Because remember, not every culture is like the U.S. Not every culture has a binary gender or sex system. Okay? So if we want to talk about sex and how we categorize sexes, we can talk about sexual dimorphism. This is just differences between the males and females of any species, usually for the purposes of reproduction, but primary differences are going to be differences in structure. So testosterone will be a primary difference, the different levels of testosterone in male or female bodies. Secondary effects are differences that are caused by those primary differences in structure. So that would be a deep voice or more ability to gain muscle, for example, or differences in size. Okay, those are going to be secondary effects. Okay, and like we talked about with race, if we look at two individuals, so I can grab one male and one female, set them side by side, it will be able to see clearly distinct sexes, right? Very easy. Put one person's male, one person's female, that was easy. But if you put more and more individuals, where do we draw that line? Right? It becomes more of a continuum and less of discrete categories. So these categories become blurred and are much more difficult to identify. There are also some individuals that don't fit into binary categories of sex. Okay? Remember, sex being the biological characteristics. So as many as 1.7% of live births in the U.S. are intersex. And those are just individuals who exhibit sexual organs and functions somewhere between male and female, often including elements of both. Okay, and so cultural responses to these intersex individuals are different, and they'll vary based on cultural values and norms and expectations. But again, this blurs that line. We like to think of sex as being one way or the other, either you're male or you're female. But as intersex individuals and being intersex becomes less taboo and an issue we can talk about more openly, this clearly defined boundary again becomes more blurred, and we start to realize that in our culture especially, it's not just two categories. There are probably many, many more categories that we just aren't yet recognizing.